Thanks very much, Colin, for that presentation. If I take out of this, I guess, we've got to get back to being the dialogue people. We've got to avoid the pink cow syndrome. Anybody got one of those? Oh, not now? No? Okay. And we've got to get back into engagement, and to do that, we need to broaden our recruitment strategy and make sure that we reflect society as a whole. And lastly, as Colin said, we've got to evaluate what we do and demonstrate value, which leads us to our next speaker, which is Dr. David Rockland, who's going to talk about the Barcelona Principles 2.0, the development of the Barcelona Principles recently launched. David's a partner and CEO of Ketchum Global Research and Analytics, and I know from my time at the PRCA and ICCO that he has been involved personally at dragging evaluation up the agenda for agency heads and leaders. So if you'd like to welcome me, join David to the stage. Thank you.
Let me ask you all a question. How many of you have ever had trouble explaining to your mother what you do for a living? Has anybody had this trouble? Yes, okay. So I want to tell you a story. The story goes like this. 5 years ago in Barcelona, on a stage, not that dissimilar than this, there's a room. The room's full of about 250 people. They're mainly from measurement companies, some of the trade press, from agencies. They represent about 150 companies. And up on stage were our luminaries from the industry. Richard, for example, is president of ICCO at the time, is up on stage. And at the stage, we vote and adopt 7 principles, now called the Barcelona Principles of Public Relations Measurement. Now, you might wonder what this has to do with my question about your mother. Well, I get nervous giving speeches. I think my CEO is somewhere. I see him, yes. My CEO's in this room. And you know what's even scarier than giving a speech when your CEO's in the room? When your mother is sitting right there. My mother happened to be vacationing in Barcelona, and she sits in the front of the room and watches me do my thing. And I had this wonderful moment, probably the best moment of my professional career, when my mother afterwards says to me, "David, after a long time, I think I finally understand what you do for a living." So I'm proud of the Barcelona Principles, but not probably for the reason you think. I made my mom happy, and it was a good day 5 years ago. What we really achieved 5 years ago is we wrote these 7 principles. They were written primarily by about 15 agencies, of the big agencies, who had gathered in New York to prepare this, along with about 15 of the largest measurement companies. We got together, we said, what are the sort of principles we could agree to as to this is the overarching framework by which you approach public relations measurement. Because until that point in time, there had been lots of debate and endless articles and yelling and screaming about what's the right way to measure. And so here was a point in time where Ketchum and all our competitor agencies and all the big measurement companies and all their competitors got together and said, let's agree to a few things that we can align around. And so the real point of the Barcelona Principles was not that they were breathtaking and created new thinking, as much as they aligned the industry around this is how you do it. So 5 years go by. And here is the AMEC Summit. And AMEC is the trade association. If you don't know who AMEC is, it's the trade association for the measurement industry. And every year it has a big international summit. And this year, instead of Barcelona, it was in Stockholm. And at this year's summit in Stockholm, there's really a consensus reached that, you know, it's been 5 years. The communications world has changed. Let's go back and look again at the Barcelona Principles and see, do they need updating? Are they still relevant? And so we embarked. I led the process, but it involved tons of organizations. For example, all 31 members of ICCO were solicited for their comments. And we involved different types of organizations as well. For example, we had the Cleveland Clinic, UNICEF, the Gates Foundation, the UK Cabinet Office provided comments and ideas as well. We involved academia for the first time. We had really shied away from that because we were really scared. You start involving academics, you go from 7 principles to 193. And we didn't want to do that. And so this year, it was a much more inclusive process that really brought about, let's call it, it brought these principles up to date. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about sort of what's new and what's different, and frankly, what's the same. Here's what's the same. I really felt, when we opened up the kimono, so to speak, of these principles to many, many more types of organizations, that what we would find is they would no longer really be relevant. The reality is what we got in 2010 and now what we have in 2015 are very much the same. The 7 concepts are still the same 7 concepts. We didn't take any away. We didn't add any new ones. They begin with a very central idea, and I'm going to walk you through all 7 principles, but they begin with the idea that you cannot measure until you can write a good goal or objective for your program first. And probably the single most important thing the Barcelona principles did in 2010 is when we tried to answer, or when people would try to answer the question, what do you make when you make PR? And there were all kinds of words that were used. We make outgrowths, outtakes, outcomes, outhouses for that matter. And frankly, what we did in 2010 was to go, you know what? You make 3 things when you make PR. You make outputs, that's basically media results, or basically the concept of delivering your message to a target audience. You make outcomes. What does that audience then do? What do they know different? How do they feel different? How do they behave different? Are they aware of something they weren't before? And then based on that change in the audience, what do you get in terms of a business or an organizational change? So this lexicon that we adopted in 2010, which says if you basically make 3 things when you make PR, remained unchanged when we went here to 2015. But a number of things, I see the formatting on this when it changes a little different. I apologize when brought into this format. But there are a number of things that are in fact different. In 2010, we spent a lot of time sort of focusing on here are the bad things when it comes to measurement. Here we still keep those bad things, but we also added that there are good things, and here's how to go about this in a positive way. In 2010, these principles were written for the PR industry. PR needed, basically, as the previous speaker pointed out, measurement's pretty new in this space. I joined Ketchum 15 years ago. Measurement 15 years ago was you cut things out of newspapers and magazines, you made a big clip book, and you gave the client a clip book, and you say, look at this beautiful book, look how big this book is. That's your measurement, okay? 15 years later, we now have our second iteration, if you will, of a set of principles. So in 2010, it was all about PR. In 2015, what we recognized is we brought in all these other voices from all these other types of organizations, that the reality is the PR world does not live in isolation by itself. If you think of PR in its own little silo, you are lost, because frankly, PR exists in an integrated environment working with a lot of other types of communication, whether it be paid communication, shared communication, owned communication. And so this year, if there's one sort of big shift, it's away from being the PR principles to very much being, let's call it the communication principles. Another change from 2010 to 2015 is in 2010 we said this is all about measurement. And measurement is basically to say, I wanted to go from A to B. I wanted to go from 10% awareness to 20% awareness. And so you measure, you do a survey, 10% to 20%, did you get there? And as we went through it this year, we said, you know what, that's nice to know. But what's better is to evaluate whether that 10 to 20% was any good. How did you get from 10 to 20%? And what insight did we learn so that next time, could we in fact go from 10 to 30%? Could we do it better? Could we do it smarter? Could we do more efficiently? So in 2010, it was just you measure from A to B. In 2015, it's you measure how did you go from A to B? Why did you go? What caused the change? What did you learn from it? So the change in the principles look like this, and this is the sort of the shortcut version, the 1-sentence version. And I'm going to walk you through 7 slides that go through each one. But you notice a couple differences if you look at these slides, or this particular slide. On the, let's see, for you it would be the left side of the screen, what you see is PR. On the right side of the screen, you see communication. And that's a real shift. It's a shift away from the idea that PR operates in a vacuum by itself. It doesn't. On that side, you see more about you see more about business. You see business results. Here, again, you bring in the UK government. You bring in UNICEF into this process. You start talking about many other kinds of results that can come from communication. And then just for editorial sake, in 2010, when I sort of ran the getting together of all the agencies and measurement companies, I sort of let everybody wrote their own principle, and then we sort of slapped them together, took them to Barcelona. This year we thought we would, and as a result the writing was kind of atrocious. This year we thought we'd actually write it like normal people write and speak, and so hopefully it reads a little better. So what I want to do is talk to you about each of the 7 principles and what's changed since 2010. So principle 1. Principle 1 is the idea, and it hasn't changed. It's the simple idea: you cannot measure, you cannot have a communication program that is measurable without first writing the goals and or objectives for that program. And it's fairly prescriptive in the sense of you basically have to answer 4 questions to write a good goal. Who are you trying to affect? What about them are you trying to change? How much is good? And by when is this going to happen? And I've often said, if you can't answer those 4 questions about a PR program or communication program you're about to run, you might want to step back and go, well then why exactly am I doing this program? What's the purpose of this program? So that idea very much stays as we go to 2015, but there are 2 things that change. One is the last bullet on this slide, which says, you know what? It isn't just about earned media. We need to write our goals recognizing there are lots of other channels here or types of communications here that we need to be cognizant of and that we need to factor into our goals. And the other change here, which came really from, if any of you know the Global Alliance, and Ann Gregory, who is the former chair, I believe it is, of the Global Alliance. I think the Global Alliance is sort of for membership organizations in PR, what ICCO is for associations of PR organizations. And she said, you know, one of the mistakes we make when we think of measurement is we think of it as something that has a start and a stop, okay? We're going to do this campaign. We're going to start it on Tuesday, it's going to end on Saturday, and we're going to measure it on Sunday. And she said, a lot of programs in communications, particularly in the public realm, run for, maybe not forever, but certainly for very long periods of time. And so measurement is about incremental change, or how things are moving, where you expect movement for a long period of time along a continuum. The UK government, by way of example, they have a communication program to stop, basically, or try to stop young men from drinking beer, getting drunk, and crashing their cars. They're not doing that from, one day to the next. They're doing that all the time. And so measurement needs to be reflective of that type of program. Second principle. Second principle in 2010 was all about the idea that it's great to measure outputs. It's great to measure media results. But the reality is, who cares about media results if it has no effect on the audience you were trying to affect? You can have all media results in the world, right? But if it doesn't make the change in the people you were trying to get to, so what? And so that was the fundamental idea, and it was an idea based around, and the language we had was around the idea of a purchase funnel. And a purchase funnel is basically, if I want you to buy something, I have to make you aware it exists, I have to make you know something about it, I have to make you feel it's a good thing, perceive it well, and then ultimately you may buy it. And as we looked at this here with all this bigger group of people in 2015, we said, that purchase funnels idea is one type of outcomes, but there are lots of other types of outcomes as well. For Cleveland Clinic, it's trying to drive patients for better health care to their hospital system. For the UK government, it's to try to get more people to get their flu shot through the National Health Service earlier in the season. So there are lots of other kinds of outcomes we wanted to bring in here and have attempted to in this iteration. In addition, in this iteration, the traditional purchase funnel ends with the idea is when you're ultimately done, when it works perfect, what do you get at the end? You get somebody to buy something. And really now with social media, that isn't the end. The end is not only did you buy it, but did you go tell all your friends how great it was? Did you recommend it to other people? So we wanted to bring that idea in here to this principle as well. Principle 3 in 2010. Basically, it's nice to know how people change, nice to know they're more aware, but at the end of the day, did we drive the business? And the idea here and the importance here is there are a lot of people, I'd say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, who would argue, and particularly in the more academic environments, PR is not about selling things. PR is not about business results. You should not be able to attach a dollar or euro sign to public relations. In 2010, we sort of drew a line in the sand and said, no, it's definitely about driving business. It's definitely about driving sales. We play a role with other aspects of marketing in driving business performance. That was the idea in 2010. Here in 2015, again, as you can imagine, with all these different other organizations involved, suddenly we're bringing in many other types of end results. Again, number of people who go to better healthcare treatment. I'll tell you about a client of mine in particular. I work with a woman named Paloma Escudero. She is the head of communications for UNICEF. Along with Jeremy Thompson, who will be speaking here, I believe, tomorrow, of Gorkana, we've designed a measurement program across 192 countries for UNICEF. Now, Paloma has 3 basic goals. Number 1, voice on children's issues. By the year 2017, 1 billion people will have been reached about the importance of children's rights. And by the end of 2017, 50 million of those people will have taken some form of action to make children more healthy, to make children around the world lead better lives. Those are organizational results. Those kinds of ideas we needed to bring into these Barcelona principles, which is in fact what we did, in particular here in Principles 2 and in Principle 3. The other idea we brought into Principle 3 here is a lot of time, the use of advanced statistics is pretty new to public relations, and we sort of wanted to document that a lot of those statistical approaches that ad agencies and media buying agencies, direct mail agencies have used forever, which are pretty new to us, really should be part of how we look at measurement, because what those techniques do is they allow us to not only isolate what did PR do, what did earned media do versus paid media, but in fact, how did earned media and paid media and shared media and owned media interact with each other to create, let's say, the outcome or the result at the end. Principle 4. In Principle 4, Principle 4. In 2010, Principle 4 was a reaction to a behavior by some unknown account people. We don't know who they are. But if you've ever heard anybody go, I had the best public relations program ever. We got 200 clips and we got 8 jillion million impressions. This was a tremendous success. Has anybody ever heard any of this, or does this just happen in New York? Okay, maybe it happened somewhere else too. Or at least, Richard, you're laughing. Thank you. And so what we were trying to do in 2010 was to say, no, good media measurement needs to basically answer the question, did you reach the right people with the right message? Okay? It isn't about how many people you reached. About how many clips you got or how many impressions. Eyeballs are worthless if they're hearing a message you don't want them to hear or to see. So here we tried to bring in 2010, and really in 2015 as well, the idea that quality is at least, if not more important, frankly, than quality. We also brought that into the idea of measuring outcomes. In other words, okay, you got a movement in awareness for the launch of a new product from 10 to 40%. A qualitative way to look at that is to say, how did you get the movement? Is it good? How would you do it differently? How did we make people feel in the course of becoming aware of the product? For example, you may get much higher awareness for the launch of a new product, but what if everybody hates it? If everybody hates it, that wasn't a good idea. You'd prefer less awareness, actually. So we try to bring those ideas in sort of this updated principle 4. Principle 5. How many of you have ever heard that AVEs are bad? Has anybody not heard this? Thank you, Rob Flaherty. At least Rob has heard it. Okay, good. Dave, you too. So AVEs, for those who don't live this every second, AVEs are basically the idea of you equate the cost of advertising with the value of PR. In 2010, the measurement world says that's a bad idea, and all the agencies, all the big agencies involved in this. Here, 2015, basically the answer is it's still a really bad idea. That hasn't changed. Not much has changed about that. We try to add a little bit here, and this is the part that will probably get me run out of this room, which is, or at least to hide until my flight back to New York tomorrow. We also said the idea of multipliers are bad. Now, what a multiplier usually implies is that earned media is more valuable than paid media, okay? Or PR is the result of PR is more credible than advertising. Universally, it's not true. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And just to make it personal, I used to write a lot for a number of outdoor magazines in the United States, a lot of fishing and hunting magazines. If you know them, Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, I was on their masthead. I had really bad news when I got reader surveys. You know what readers cared more about? The ads. They cared more about the ads because they want to see what's the new boat that's coming on the market, what's the new fishing stuff, the new hunting stuff. The editorial was important. If you've ever seen the September issue of Vogue magazine, has anybody ever seen this? It's about, must weigh about 100 pounds, 98% of which is advertising. Nobody reads the editorial. My wife buys that. She doesn't even know there is editorial in that. So the point is to make this universal statement that PR-driven content is always more valuable, 2.5 times, always more valuable than paid, is honestly just not true. There are cases it is, and there are ways to prove it, and frankly, there are cases where it isn't. And so we tried to bring that particular idea here into this update. Principle 6. Principle 6, startling revelation in 2010. Social media should be measured. Now, you're probably sitting there going, well, is that the best you guys could do in 2010? Like social media should be measured? Like who doesn't know that? In 2010, 5 years ago, social media was coming on. And there were a lot of people who were saying, hey, that's just a bunch of people writing these funny little tweet things to each other and, you know, sharing photos with each other. Who cares? That's not PR. That's not even measurement. We don't need to measure that. And so in 2010, the measurement industry said, no, that is important. We should be measuring it. The reality is I thought this principle, because social media has changed so much, the techniques have changed so much, that we'd see something very different now in 2015. You put all these great heads together and they go, you know what? It still should be measured. Probably the new thought here is twofold. One, that the same way of thinking about traditional media, like print, is applied to social media. It's about who you reach with what message. You tweak it here to say it's who you have engaged or who engages in a conversation or in a community with you about your content or your message, but the idea is still very much the same. The other idea we brought forward here is to try to bring in the idea is there are such things as vanity metrics, okay? Now, vanity metrics, Colin, I think, referred to it a few minutes ago. I'm linked to probably over 2,000 people on LinkedIn, okay? I basically don't decline anybody's invitation. I don't know any of those people, okay? I don't know how many 100 friends I have on Facebook. They're not my friends, okay? They're just not my friends. I wouldn't know them if I ran into them walking down the street. I probably have 4 friends, and that's only if David Gallagher likes me on that particular day. So the point is, we often will measure in social media these numbers that are astronomical but are kind of meaningless. Maybe all your Facebook friends are your true friends. If your kid was getting married, you'd invite all of them to that kid's wedding. I'm kind of betting not. The point is we're trying to make here is there are real measures as it relates to social media in terms of are people engaging with your content? Are you having a conversation with them? Those are real measures. Likes, total number of tweets, total number of tweet impressions, total number of friends on Facebook, or people you're linked into, not so much. Final principle is number 7. Number 7 was designed by the industry. Again, the principles in 2010 were the industry writing them for the most part. People who do measurement every day. Here in 2015, now we brought in people who use measurement a lot. In 2010, we were basically trying to police the measurement world because we see all these firms who have all these razzmatazz type metrics, which no one knows what they mean and no one understands how they're calculated but themselves. And we sort of said, you know, to be a good measurement result, a good measurement program, you need to be able to explain to somebody how'd you get the number and what does it mean, and if you ran the survey, if you ran the measurement again, you'd get the same number. Here in 2015, we kind of brought this up to date a little more and said, yeah, that's all still true. You shouldn't have fake metrics. But the idea of transparency really applies to the broader world of research as well. If I run a survey for you, I can influence the results of any survey by what order I ask the questions in that survey in, okay? I need to show you that order. We need to talk through that order. You should know what it is. And so those kind of ideas, if I run focus groups for you, or other types of qualitative research, you need to be sure that your moderator of your focus groups isn't biasing the results in any way. And so that idea around transparency and honesty and ethicalness was really brought out in this year's rewrite or update. And then the idea that was brought in, and frankly, I just added it the last minute because it's something we really should have been thinking of, is we do a lot of surveys for clients. Last August, 14 months ago, we noticed a whole lot of them drop. Confidence numbers, knowledge numbers, perception numbers, a whole lot of different clients. And we thought, oh, this is weird. Everybody is dropping. Well, everyone was dropping, because, this is for the United States, because we were scared to death in August of 2014 of the Ebola outbreak that was taking place, and ISIS had really taken hold, if you will, in the media, doing crazy, terrible things. What happens? The public gets scared. When the public gets scared, they have less confidence in institutions, whether they're a company, a hospital system, or the government. So explaining measurement in the context in which the measurement is being done is particularly important. So, last slide. Here's what's next. We launched these new principles, and they're endorsed by all the organizations you can possibly think of. ICCO was a big part in this update, and again, it really is an update. It's not a rewrite. It's an evolution of the thinking. We launched this September 3rd in London. In September, there were a lot of measurement events held. There were, it was called Measurement Month. There were I think it was well over 60 events held in 25 different countries, 6 different continents. So the education process, which very much needs to continue, is well underway, and I know will continue here. In fact, when Francis spoke this morning, he talked about the measurement guide that's going to be released tomorrow of ICCO and AMEC, who I'm the past chairman of, that's being released tomorrow. That item is another example of this education program. And finally, have the Barcelona principles been adopted everywhere? No. Are AVEs completely wiped out? No, they're not completely wiped out. But there's some great signs, and the one that sort of makes me the happiest, if you will, is the UK government. The UK government, the Cabinet Office, which basically works for 10 Downing Street, works for the Prime Minister, and oversees their communications part, oversees the communications parts of the 21 departments that make up the UK government. Department of Defense, Department of Climate Change and the Environment. They adopted the Barcelona principles, and in fact, every communications program run by a UK government department is intended to adhere to these principles in its measurement. And they have a council of outside advisors that meet every 6 weeks to evaluate how well they're doing. So When a whole government of a whole country says this is how you do it, I think we're making progress. There will be a Barcelona Principles 3.0 at some point, or 4.0, but nonetheless, I think what we intended to do in 2010 has now really continued and sort of become, yes, this is how you measure. Now, I haven't told my mother about Barcelona Principles 2.0. I was so proud of what I got out of Barcelona Principles 1.0 in Barcelona 5 years ago that she finally understood what I do for a living. I'm just going to kind of leave that one alone. So anyway, with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and Richard, I turn it back to you.